A drunken fight at a fairgrounds in Pike County, Kentucky in August of 1882. 3-on-1 odds leading to the stabbing and shooting of Ellison Hatfield by 3 of the sons of Randall McCoy, Tolbert, Farmer, and Bud. Some accounts have him stabbed over 24 times, and he's been shot once. As mentioned last episode, all of what I'm going to venture into today is directly taken from court testimony. Well, let's get into it. Welcome to This Famous Vendetta. I'm your host, Jason Hatfield. Welcome. The boys are arrested, and the constables begin heading to Pikeville when Goodlias and Wall, both brothers of the injured Ellison, have gotten word of the attack, catch up, and convince the constables to turn the boys over to them. Witnesses later recall Wall Hatfield asserting that the McCoy boys needed to go to trial in this area for their alleged involvement in the injury of Ellison Hatfield. Wall is a justice of the peace himself, and his brother is in bad shape. The constables agree to this, and despite everything before, I feel like this crucial choice, this is the fulcrum upon which everything else will ultimately change. Well, the constables are convinced by Wall's argument. The group then proceeded to Reverend Anderson Hatfield's home for dinner. The boys, by some accounts, are tied up on the porch of that house. A growing number of Hatfield and Hatfield-adjacent men have received word and begin to converge on the house. Not to storm the house, but to join in the vigil. They have dinner. As the group dined, emotions ran high. We've not seen anything quite like this attack in the story. Have there been disagreements? Yes. Deaths? Yes, but a vicious attack? There have been shootings, perhaps a quick death, too. In fact, Asa Harmon McCoy and Bill Staten both are under mysterious circumstances, at least, according to family lore. No real witnesses, but nothing the likes of this. It's at an election. There are lots of people there. A guilty verdict would more than likely be decided, but either by time or reinterpretation, there are decisions that are made that don't make a lot of sense. We're going to look into those today. Should Wall have taken the boys into his custody? As said before, a trial would be easier if the witnesses were closer instead of almost a day's ride to the court, but these decisions have consequences, and those consequences begin to unfold. Well, Devil Anse Hatfield arrives at the house and called for all friends of the Hatfields to fall into line, a command that implied a gathering of support for whatever actions might follow. It was at this point that Anse seems to take control of events. Now, being the older brother, perhaps Wall felt that he could control Anse. Anse was the younger brother. Ellison was the younger brother of both of them. Should the worst happen. But Wall is also a justice of the peace. He's the law. So was he relinquishing control? Why would Anse be the one in charge? We've seen 2 court cases, so I don't know. Maybe it'll all turn out all right. Well, after dinner, the McCoy brothers were loaded onto a sled for transportation down the creek. Witnesses, including their father Randall and older brother James, provided conflicting accounts of whether the boys were tied together and at what point. This discrepancy raises questions about the treatment of the McCoy boys during their transfer. Now, Ellison is in a different fight. He's fighting for his life. He's laid up in bed at Anderson Farrell's house being cared for by his wife and mother. The boys, Tolbert, Farmer, and Bud, have been moved and are now being held under armed guard at a nearby abandoned schoolhouse, presumably so that the family could keep a close eye on Ellison's condition, as Farrell's house is a relatively short distance away, and have any subsequent trial in this area where the fight took place. But why not keep them at someone's house? Keep them in a barn. Why an abandoned schoolhouse that nobody has claim to? Were there implications that people wanted to avoid? Well, now under guard, the tension is high. The previous certainty felt by the boys in their position of self-defense, I'm assuming, was undoubtedly being tested to its limit. There were a number of people either related to Ellison or were friends with the family, and they were seemingly all armed and surrounding the schoolhouse. Now, this brings about some questions. Why armed? To protect the boys or to prevent their being liberated? I mean, it feels as if it's the latter. The constables had agreed with Wall, and it didn't appear that they were forced to turn the boys over, so why the armed guard afterward? Did they believe that the McCoys would come armed to liberate them? Was it to protect the boys from the wrath of angry Hatfields? Did the Hatfields truly think that should Ellison die, the boys would be acquitted, as in Bill Staten's case? I mean, the fight happened at an election. There must have been multiple witnesses, but could the witnesses have traveled to Pikeville so far away in order to testify? Or did they simply feel that if Ellison died, the boys would be murderers and then handle the sentencing then? I mean, twice we've seen court cases, one for land and one for theft. Perhaps murder, or at the very least, assault would be different? Well, it all hinges on Ellison. The boy's brother, James McCoy, has traveled with the boys part of the way to the schoolhouse, but leaves because he's afraid for his own safety. The constables, being officials from Kentucky, also leave upon crossing into West Virginia. They've taken the boys into West Virginia from Kentucky. This is going to be important later on down the line. Now, Tolbert, seeing Wall, apparently asks him to stay with he and his brothers to protect them because the feeling of events is becoming ominous, and Wall is a justice of the peace. The boys undoubtedly realized the trouble they were in. Having stabbed and shot Ellison so many times, if he were to live, there is no telling what his life would be like having been so grievously injured. Wall says he'll do what he can, but first he wants to go check on his brother's condition. Wall leaves the schoolhouse and heads to Anderson Farrell's, a short distance away. Ellison is in extreme pain, but he is conscious. Wall, probably seeing the seriousness of Ellison's wounds, speaks to him. And this is what gets a little strange. He asks Ellison what he would want done with the boys. Now, why ask that? If Ellison said he wanted them dead, would Wall have complied? Wasn't that the point of all of this, to see justice served? But I guess what is justice? If Ellison dies, the boys are murderers. Who would be the judge of their sentencing, though? Well, Ellison asks that they be prosecuted with the civil law. No lawless killings will be had in retaliation. So Wall spends a little time with his younger brother and returns to the schoolhouse. Now, by this point, the boy's mother, Sally, has arrived at the schoolhouse, and she is inconsolable, crying, praying, pleading for the release of her sons. The boys are tied together at the schoolhouse at this point. When Wall arrives, she begs him to release her sons. She wants them taken to Pikeville. Now, was she trying to convince Devil Anse before, or was Wall still in charge? There's been some books, one book that I've read, that considered Wall was potentially the leader of the Klan and not Devil Anse Hatfield, but in only this book, in no other source, it always seems to be Devil Anse. In fact, some family lore has Devil Anse being the one taking the boys away from the constables, but according to court testimony, that's not what happened. Wall does this, and he's a justice of the peace. People trust him. He's been elected, multiple times to this position. So this mother is appealing to Wall, not Devil Anse, but Wall, begging him to release her sons. Now, after having seen the condition of his brother, Wall is undoubtedly emotional. By now, he's carrying a shotgun and tells her, amongst her pleas, somewhat abruptly, to make less noise, and leave. Around this time, someone rushes to the house, the schoolhouse, saying that a party is on its way to take the boys, and that it's probably Randall putting this rescuing party together. And this causes a stir. Guns begin to be prepared, and Sally, frantically trying to prevent an anxious situation from becoming worse, pleads that this is not true. There are no attempts being made to rally a group together to liberate the boys at all, by force or otherwise. In fact, Randall is on his way to Pikeville to get a lawyer to assist in this situation. Amongst her pleas, Wall tells Sally to leave and warns her that if anyone comes to attack them and take the boys will probably be the first ones shot. And in more than one piece of testimony, it's allegedly claimed that he says that the boys would be, quote, shot as full of holes as a sifter bottom. Now, that's pretty graphic. It's pretty blunt. Reluctantly, Sally says goodbye to her boys. In an odd turn, later testimony by more than one person claims that Farmer, the one who allegedly took the shot, apparently tells his mother that Wall has treated them well and to let everyone know to be kind to him. Now, we'll get more into this later. But this is actual testimony. Two people, discuss this. Now, for Sally, it must have been gut-wrenching for her to have left her children. Yes, they had done wrong, but due process should be observed, even if the outcome were the same. If the boys were guilty, then they were guilty, even if Ellison dies, which would arguably be worse. Maybe she thought she could take them and just, have them run away forever. I mean, the love of a mother is strong, and anything to rescue her children must have gone through her mind. The boys must have been feeling that there was less and less hope for them, except that they may still have their day in court, even if they are found guilty. There are different levels of guilt when it comes to death, though, right? I mean, there's manslaughter, where you have crimes of passion or possibly negligence. There's third-degree murder, where killing, happens in the midst of, another felony. Second degree, which is an intentional killing with malice. And then there's first degree, which is the most serious, which is a killing with intent and planning. Now, from what I've read, at this point, Wall begins to realize that his efforts to bring them back to this area for trial may have been a mistake. Tensions had grown, personalities were taking control, and Wall felt that maybe they should have been taken to Pikeville, if nothing else, to put distance between the aggressors and the anger of their jailers. Yes, justice needed to be served, but in a legitimate jail, the jailers would not serve as judge, jury, and executioner, even if the actions of the boys in their attack were well witnessed, well documented, and in a court of law were found guilty. If the sentence were the same, at least it would have been determined as such through due process. Of course, there must have been a concern that the boys would not have been found guilty in a Kentucky courtroom also. After all, the whole Bill Staten case, they were found not guilty, and, after the hog trial, again, true to McCoy says that, a McCoy couldn't get a fair trial. And then after the acquittal of Sam and Paris, Hatfields thought a West Virginian couldn't get a fair trial. So maybe there's that playing along with it also. So what do you do? Well, at this point, it may have been too late. Word came that evening, late, that Ellison had succumbed to his wounds. His body had been taken to Elias's. Ellison had lingered in agony for almost 2 days. Wall and Ance's younger brother was dead from a brutal attack. Who knows how long of a stunned silence there must have been. It couldn't have been believed that Ellison would ultimately survive such an attack, but There also must have been that little glimmer of hope that Ellison would have made it. I mean, it's like, that feeling that no matter how old or sick your parents get, they'll bounce back. They'll be there. They've always been there. Ellison was dead. The boys were no longer assailants. They were murderers. Now, taking into consideration, true to McCoy in her book, The McCoys, their story claims that, they had acted in self-defense and they were right in what it is that they have done. Now, of course, Truda's accounts tend to be very, very slanting towards the McCoys. And I've heard a lot of complaints and a lot of these, researched books. A lot of McCoys feel that there is a Hatfield slant, that there is a pro-Hatfield bias. But still, 3-on-1 stabbing and shooting? I don't know how you could really make that into self-defense so much. Well, some in the group then began to take action to execute justice levied upon the now murderous boys. Wall actively stops some of the men from trying to force their way into the schoolhouse to kill these boys. Now, these boys definitely need to be taken to Pikeville, if nothing else, to put distance between the accused and wrath. In an effort to recross the Rubicon, Wall argues that the boys should be taken back to Pikeville for trial, and he goes to Devilance to convince this charge and transport. Another of the party, David Wolford, joins Wall in his bid to persuade the mob to change course and let the courts handle the matter. Both arguments fall on deaf ears. The decision was made. Justice would be served. Wall would later make the statement, quote, "I had a hard time to save them. If I could, I would have them sent back to Kentucky for trial," end quote. Had he not made the decision to bring them back initially, maybe this would turn out different. Wall, not wishing to be part of whatever is to come, exhausted from the events, undoubtedly being conflicted with the position he helped create in this matter, and being unable to change the mob's mind or his own brother, Devilance's, gives up his efforts to put the genie back in the bottle, and he decides to leave. The only thing he seems to be able to control now are his own actions, so he wants to go see the remains of his brother. And Pliant Mayhorn, one of his sons-in-law, goes with him. Now, on their way, they meet Good Lias, who asks them to accompany him to the house of a Joe Davis so they can get some whiskey, presumably to toast the life of Ellison or to perhaps drown their sorrows at the loss of their brother. They travel to Davis's, get the whiskey, and begin to head south, making it to the mouth of Sulphur Creek along the Tug River, when Elias has to stop for a call of nature. And that's when they heard the gunshots. Across the river, back in Kentucky, about 300 yards northeast of where they were standing, between 30 to 50 gunshots are heard. To many, it may be thought that it was a skirmish between two warring factions. Wall, Elias, and Pliant, however, understand that this is the act that will end 3 additional lives. The boys were being executed. Wall, Elias, and Pliant immediately head to where the gunshots were fired, and they come across a party at the mouth of Mate Creek consisting of a group of people: Daniel White, Charlie Carpenter, Devilance, Johnsey Hatfield, Cap Hatfield, which is a younger brother of Johnsey and a son of Devilance, Alex Messer, Doc Mayhorn, one of Wall's sons-in-law, as you may remember, Charlie Carpenter, Jeff White, Mose Christian, Tom Mitchell, Bill Hatfield, and the supposedly illegitimate son of Ellison Hatfield named Ellison Mounts. Ellison Mounts is also known as Cotton Top, and he's universally considered to have been a bit slow and possibly having some form of albinism, leading to his nickname due to the light nature of his hair. There are some discrepancies about a couple of others in this group, as some remember them being there, others do not. I'm including the names of the individuals named multiple times in the court documents. And to finalize this bloody act, there are the conflicting accounts as to what happens next. When Wall meets the party, what occurred was undoubtedly discussed. Some people testify that Wall made the parties involved swear an oath that nobody will ever discuss what happened or they would be hanged. Wall, however, will testify that he did no such thing. James, the brother to the boys, he hears the gunshots, as did many in the valley. I mean, how could you not? So much gunfire in a valley, the noise had to have reverberated everywhere. He rushes to the location he heard the guns firing. By this point, the group is cleared off. Beside the Tug River, back across the river in Kentucky, he finds a horrific scene. Quote, "We found my 3 brothers tied together and tied to pawpaw bushes. My little brother was on his knees, the top of his head shot off. Tolbert was shot 15 times and Farmer either 11 or 7 times." End quote. Sally will later testify that, quote, "Tolbert was shot twice in the head and 3 or 4 times in the body. Farmer was shot in the head and either 9 or 11 times in the body. The top of one side of the little boy's head was shot off," end quote. Imagine finding your brothers in such a state. Little boy's head. Was Bud actually 15, as Sally testified in court later, or was he 18? Now, Truda claims that Bill, one of the younger brothers, was actually the participant, and that he is 15 and Farmer is 18. But even by the genealogy in her book, Bill would have been, 16, 2 years younger than Bud? If Truda McCoy's account is correct, and it was in fact a Bill McCoy who was 2 years younger than Bud, who had done the deed, then Bill would have been what? By Sally's account, 13? Or by others, 16? I mean, she claims he's 15. So maybe Sally is right. Maybe the genealogy of the sons in Truda's book are wrong. Well, Truda will write in her book, The McCoys, their story, that Bill will be so devastated at the death of his brother for his crimes that he will die of sadness. The sight of seeing your sons in such a state had to have been horrifying in its brutality. If the boys had had their day in court and been found guilty, an execution would have been done by a clean hanging, not by a firing squad. And again, if a fight had been fair, Ellison wouldn't have been stabbed so much and shot. Truda will seemingly always defend the boys' actions as lawful, saying they had a right to defend themselves. She will vilify this act of vengeance and casually seem to cast aside the acts of the 3 McCoy boys that led to this point. Now, what do I think? I think it goes to show that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. I mean, this is all so alarming and sad. From a precedent of court cases to an execution of such a nature is tough to wrap a mind around. Maybe the belief was that if, we wanted to consider this an eye for an eye, that Bill Staten's life for Asa Harmon's was a debt paid. And maybe the brutal stabbing and shooting of Ellison by these boys was a debt in which a firing squad was the payment. I really don't know. Why shoot them so many times? Unless you had a message. The boys weren't going to suffer for as long as Ellison, but someone was going to find their bodies and in this condition. And this brings us to something I've brought up a couple of times. Maybe Ellison's elevation in his military service was because of this end. Kind words are often said of the dead, and perhaps the horrifying circumstances of Ellison's death were the impetus for enlarging his part in the Civil War. to make it seem like he had survived so much only to fall in such a way. Maybe people actually believed it. A tragic figure now inserted into a larger dramatic scene. As sad as his death is, and this does not sit well with me. He wasn't who later groups tried to make him out to be. At least in fact, maybe he was in spirit. Emotion, it seems, always plays a part in the telling of history. Tolbert, Farmer, and Bud will be taken home and buried in one coffin near Sally and Randolph's home. And just this past week, I received a book from a colleague of my wife's who had been at an estate sale and put a bid on a book about the Hatfields and McCoys published in 1944 by an L.D. Hatfield. And in that book is a photo of the alleged location of the killing of the boys and a picture of a shirt that is also alleged to have been worn by Ellison when he was killed. Why would you hold on to that? And you can go to where these locations are in, Kentucky and West Virginia. Well, Pikeville has its own little map. And my wife and I have been to this place. And now, granted, a lot can change. Maybe even as much as 80 years when perhaps these photos were taken. But it doesn't look the same. That's for sure. There are holes in this shirt. And, it looks just to be a plain, dark, somewhat plaid shirt. And you can find those on our social media pages if you want to look. I'll have those posted on there. This will be widely considered, this event, the death of Ellison and the three boys, this will be considered the first brutal act of vengeance in what will be forever considered the feud. There's no denying the motive. This was blood for blood. An eye for an eye, a vicious murder, and a horrific execution. This is what the vendetta ultimately means for me. This tragic, unnecessary death of 4 people. It's not comical. It's not slapstick. It's not goofy, toothless, jug-toting hillbillies. It's tragic. It's a tragic, unnecessary series of deaths. Aristotle once wrote that tragedy is not man, but of the choices he makes. Ultimately, you're held accountable for the choices you make. These choices we've just experienced will change everything. It will change my family's history. Not just the Hatfields in general, but my direct family. Its emotion and its vengeance. Hearing about this story in my youth and seeing it depicted as such in, Far Side strips and Bugs Bunny cartoons always led me to think that it was, this whole conflict was kind of silly. It was 2 groups of hicks just shooting at each other because they were, unintelligent, and that's what happens. Some slight, something silly, blasted away an overreaction, but this isn't really that, is it? My first time reading about it in college gave me pause. This was horrible. This was dramatic. This was tragic. Whatever injuries had been incurred prior to this apparently meant very little. This, however, was violent, vengeful death. I can't express that enough. Wall and Ants lose a brother to a vicious stabbing and shooting, and Randall loses 3 sons to a subsequent firing squad. A brother and now 3 sons. How do you let that go? Can you let that go? I'm sure we would all want to see justice done, that the boys maybe would have let the fight go, or maybe Wall would have let the boys be taken to Pikeville to stand trial, but in a time and place where you relied on yourself, and with so many clamoring for whatever they interpreted vengeance to be, it probably seemed understandable that those who committed murder would be also killed. But by a firing squad? 30 to 50 shots, 11 times, your head blown off? That places an edge on the message. This wasn't just, justice. It was, as Spears wrote, wrath. This is what the feud feels like to me. I'm not sure how many people have fully documented murders in their family history, but this event is violent, sad, angry, and ultimately what will perhaps seal my ancestors' fate. But unlike Asa Harmon's death, these will not go away quietly. As hurt as Wall, Lias, and Ants may have been with the death of their brother, it's now time for the McCoys to feel that vengeful view. This is how it begins. So was it because of the Civil War? No. Hogs? No. It was a drunken brawl that led to the deaths of 4 people. Ellison killed by the wrath of 3 boys, and now their ends by the wrath of a dozen others. And we'll see how it unfolds, because make no mistake, what we know about this famous, historically, quintessentially American vendetta, it started from this event. And it'll take more death before it's resolved. And that brings us to a close for episode 10. 10 episodes so far. Next episode, we're going to be pretty close to the 250th birthday of the United States. I know this is kind of a hard turn, but young, 250 years old, young by many standards, but historic nonetheless. In celebration of this event, we're going to discuss how my family has ties to that conflict. So we'll take a brief pause in our story and look back at yet another famous vendetta of sorts, the American Revolution, and my family's ties to it. You won't want to miss it. There's so much more to happen. Thanks again for joining us for this famous vendetta. Look for us on social media. Subscribe, like, rate us, and leave us a message. We want to hear from you. Now go out there and make history in a good way. See you next time.